Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, we take your toughest maintenance questions and we do our best to answer them and to have a little fun in the process. So if you have a question and would like to be part of the show, reach out to us at podcasts@aopa.org.
And if you like the show, make sure and follow and subscribe so you won't miss an episode.
And if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and interesting maintenance stories, easiest way to do that is to text the word savvy, SAVVY, to 33777, and a little mail bot will ask you for your email address, your name and your email address, put you on the list. So text savvy, SAVVY, to 33777 to put yourself on the list.
So Mike doesn't know how much he's missing and how much he wishes he was here. So for those of you watching or listening, Colleen and I are in Dayton, Ohio, and we're currently sitting at, I guess this is the lobby or the front room of Carillon Park, all things Dayton, as well as the Wright brothers. So behind us, you see a mural and some information. Show them what's above your head there, Colleen.
Oh.
Oops, there you go. So we've, some huge woman.
Winged victory, holding
Yeah.
the Wright flyer.
So we
right
have
over
seen,
my head.
yeah, we have seen some just amazing things yesterday and this morning. We've seen the 1905 Wright 3, which the Wright brothers said was the first real airplane. And that's, oh gosh. So there we are. Wait,
That's at the Wright Flyer.
that's at
That
the
was
Wright.
last night,
That was last night at the Wright B Flyer.
the Wright B Flyer, which
Yeah,
is a
and that's-
flying version of the airplane.
Yeah, it's a look-alike.
Yeah.
And that's us standing in front of the Wright Brothers National Museum here at Carillon Park in Dayton.
Mhm.
So if I get this right, it's a national park within a locally or privately funded park.
Right.
I think I got that right.
And
that's-
those are two mannequins sitting in the Wright flyer. Right?
Yeah,
That's Orville on the left. No.
so that's
No.
Dave and Colleen.
But this is a flying airplane, and we were guided around by one of the pilots that's cleared to fly it. It was fascinating talking to him, and they actually are asking if Paul wants to come back and do the condition inspection on this plane when it's due later in the year.
Which I will thoroughly love to do.
Are you qualified?
I think he
Ooh.
is.
I am certified.
Do you have the wing warping endorsement on your?
Oh,
I-
shoot. No, I'm not going to. But I am certified. I don't know that I'm qualified, but I'm certified. So this one, I flew in this airplane.
Certifiable.
Certifiable. I flew in this airplane back in 2009, and Rich Stepler, who's the chief pilot in the Wright B Incorporated group, is a former customer and now good friend of mine. He has a Cessna 210, and he took me for a ride, and this is just amazing. And they have another lookalike that's lighter and newer that's in the process of the initial experimental flight testing. They have about 10 hours left to go.
They call it the brown airplane. This is the brown airplane. The other one's the white airplane. and
Purely by color.
It's much smaller, and it's still being tested.
Yeah, the rumors I heard was that it flies, but not very well. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is not something that you want to go out on a Sunday afternoon kind of flight. So the picture you see there, that's a lookalike. This is here at Carillon Park, and that's a lookalike of the place where Charlie Taylor built the engine and a lot of other things at the bicycle shop. So he's behind us working on a lathe.
We didn't want to bother him.
We didn't want to bother him. He looked busy. But it is interesting. He's wearing a vest and long sleeve shirt and a tie, and
Yeah,
that's
very
how we
formal.
work. And on the very right edge of the screen, you see the tail end of the wind tunnel.
Yeah.
This is
Where
just
they
an
did the-
amazing place. So
Yeah,
let's see.
I've always sort of had this rule that you never want to hire an IA who isn't wearing a vest and a tie.
Oh boy, I'm going to have new company shirts. I said that
Absolutely.
now.
Would that be cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't. You've seen some of the guys at my shop? I'm not sure we can find vests that'll fit.
Oh,
No,
you
I
need
don't
to
mean-
stop
I'm just-
feeding them donuts.
no. But if you're late to work, you have to bring donuts. I'm just saying
Oh,
that
that's the problem.
if you saw some of these guys in a vest, you think they don't look right for a vest. It's just too formal.
Oh, that's what you meant.
Yeah, I was.
So would you guys like to mention the reason that you're there on this particular date?
Oh yeah, the whole reason we're here. So,
Seems like it would be a good thing to mention.
Yeah,
Right.
May 24th is Aviation Maintenance Technician Day. And we've been trying to get up here and do this actually on that date. So we missed it a little bit. But so we're here, all things Charles Taylor. I always think of it as Charles Taylor, but all the people around here call him Charlie Taylor, which is, I'm sure, how he would have been addressed back in the day. And we've learned all kinds of things about Charlie Taylor from, so to make sure we get all these people's names right, we wanted to be sure. Alex is the guy
Museum.
here.
Yeah, museum director. We're going to thank them on the way out. So.
Oh yeah, we'll thank them on the way out. So Alex has just opened the doors here for us at Carillon Park. Just been spectacular, showing us around. And then Mackenzie is the director of
The National Aviation Heritage Area, which
Yes.
includes other museums in the area as well.
There are all kinds of things around here, including the where they flew the airplanes out in the field when they had the catapults and all that stuff. And
The prairie, out on the prairie.
the prairie, which is kind of bizarre. So if you come to Dayton and see all the Wright brothers and Charles Taylor stuff, you could, I don't know, 2 days to
Yeah.
see everything, and not including the Air Force Museum, which itself
Which is
a day or two.
spectacular.
Oh, absolutely spectacular.
That's an amazing museum.
So the issue is, though, the person that wants to see all this has a family that probably doesn't, because they hear about this stuff all the time. So what you do is you get your some aviation buddies together, and they all come here and spend 2 or 3 days. There's so much
Yeah.
to see. It's just amazing.
Yep.
And you got to be careful, because it has to be buddies that it's okay if you tear up a little bit when you see certain things, because it's pretty cool. I know it's
There's
history stuff.
There's also a brewery here on the park grounds.
Yeah, careful about that.
Everything you could want, airplanes and brewery.
And one of my favorite things is, Mike, remember when we were at the Outer Banks, and the ranger was telling us a story about on the day they flew, and the mayor came out, and the young man skipped school, and then the third guy came, the one that took the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So the camera, and his name is, this is my favorite story, I won't give you the long version, but John Daniels was not handed the camera, but was told to stand next to the camera and given the little button to push. And they didn't tell him what to take a picture of. They just said, if you see something interesting, push this button. He had never seen a camera in his life.
Boy, and his timing was like perfect.
Yeah.
It was absolutely perfect. But they didn't even know they had a picture until they got back to Dayton and had it developed. And so
Amazing.
the guy that took one of the most iconic aviation pictures had never even seen a camera before.
Incredible.
Anyway, yeah, that's just incredible. So anyway, that kind of stuff is here. It's really cool.
And one of the best things was when we were at the Charles Taylor display showing the bicycle shop, there was a gentleman with his daughter there, and it turns out she's an A&Ps student at the University of Cincinnati, or Cincinnati School of Aeronautics, or
Yeah.
something like that. And she is halfway through getting her mechanic's license. So we had a long talk, and Paul tried to recruit her for his shop.
Of course.
Okay, before we have our first guest, a small factoid about Charles Taylor, the first aviation mechanic. Charles was born in Nebraska in a log cabin in 1868, and he came to Dayton following his wife's family, and the Wrights hired him to work in their bicycle shop and gave him a 5 cents raise from 25 cents an hour to 30 cents an hour, and he took their offer.
That's how he got stolen away from somebody else.
Yeah.
Some other bicycle shop.
That's actually a pretty significant raise if you think
it's a huge raise. Yeah.
So on that note, our first question is from Jim, who is tired of his airplane breathing down his neck. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi,
I'm in
the UK with a much modified N-registered twin Comanche turbo Robertson Stoll. It's got over 50 STCs on it. I've owned it for about, not the same 50 that it started with either. I've owned it for about 6 years. The just possibly relevant airframe mods are pretty much every go faster fairing cowling you could imagine, and a radar nose, which has got a non-standard heater and a fresh air inlet. The problem is a really significant cold draft from aft that hits you at neck level in the front seats.
Yep.
I've experienced that.
Yeah. Done everything sort of you'd expect to try and eliminate drafts, but anyway, we've had small and willing friendly pilots crawl around the back in flight, and all the air is definitely coming from the tail cone. The rear bulkhead in a PA-30 is pretty standard in most ways. It's a pretty solid lower half with the usual flimsy hatch shelf. But the slightly unusual thing on a PA-30 is it's got a grill which connects with a big diameter scat hose that goes out of the back of the bulkhead under the aircraft and exits in the middle in a vent that faces aft on the underside. I think Piper's original idea was that helped heat to get to the rear seat areas. The only obvious source of air is the fresh air inlet on the fin. And one helpful post on a forum said that they'd had a problem in which they got a crack in the sump arrangement for the fresh air inlet, which allowed the air straight from the fin into the back area, and that produced the same symptoms. So my question is to you, what are your thoughts on airflow, and how could such a large pressure buildup happen, especially imagining that the tail cone's got a very large hole in the end of it?
Being a former Comanche owner, single and twin, in my single Comanche, cruising across in the middle of nowhere with a friend of mine, and that back bulkhead that you were talking about actually partially detached, and it was about 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and we were freezing for the next 30 minutes, had to put our parkas on and the whole bit. So there are a few entry levels, and you mentioned one, the scoop, and on my twin Comanche, I had a modified NACA scoop because it had the dorsal fin for the Stoll kit that was on it. And if that scoop, which you've already talked about being cracked, or if the hose comes off, or the scat hose that goes from that scoop to the rear bulkhead has any openings, if it's like cracked or torn or something, you wouldn't think that would create a lot of pressure, but it can. The other is where your wing root fairings are, and where the wing spars come into the cabin. This is like one of the main areas where air gets into the cabin, and it needs to be completely sealed. There's some flimsy little panels that get screwed in there on the aft side of the spar, and it lets air in, and I'm sure you know about all the opening underneath the back seat, and you have the canvas cover under the back seat. And if that seals really well, then that area will still pressurize under the seat, and then there's nothing to keep it from going under the seat back into the tail cone and pressurizing from the air coming at the wing roots.
I think that's only on the singles. The floor's pretty solid on the twin com, and I've replaced the whole of the floor, also replaced the insulation underneath it.
But did you seal it where the spars come in?
We did our best, yes, replaced all those seals, but I don't see how it's getting into the tail cone when there are no obvious gaps under the floor.
Well, there are at the bulkheads. So each bulkhead, from each compartment from one to another, there are openings there. They're
Yeah,
supposed
but
to be closed off.
mm, we've
Where
done
the
our
cables
best.
come through and all that.
Mm, yes, I suppose that if only a small opening could do it. Can I go on to tell you about a development that's happened since I sent the question?
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
You baited us there. Shame.
I mean, those are the very good points. Now there's a real gale, as opposed to a strong draft, from from under the front seats. Now, I mean a gale. I mean the sort of draft that you would feel if you had a high quality air blow dryer in a washroom. And
Wow.
the
The picture
Except
image
colder.
I'm getting is except cold, not that hot air.
well, another interesting thing is that now this blast varies with the pitch angle of the aeroplane, and it also varies with whether the heater is on or not on. And I'm not quite as confident as this, but it varies with the heading of the aeroplane a little bit. At the moment you have any sort of yaw in the situation, you can tell the difference.
Huh.
So do you have, so since you have the radome, you have the scoop, just the inlet, the air inlet scoop is just under the radome,
Yes, yeah.
underneath, not the hole in the very front.
No, it's a knacker
Okay.
scoop, I think they call it, into a sort of reservoir, and everything then comes off the reservoir.
Do you have, so how about the, for the nose wheel well, you have the canvas cover there, and that's all sealed off, I assume.
Yes, although it's a pretty shaky seal arrangement
Yes,
on that canvas cover. I mean, I can see more reasons for this huge draft under the seats, because that could be the little seals on the steering rods for the nose wheel, couldn't it?
Right.
Something
The
like
steering.
that.
Mhm. The rubber boots.
And so I'm desperate with this. It's been going on for 6 years. If I could prove that the air from the front was somehow coming in that way and then hitting the back, somehow getting to the back bulkhead, at least that would be understandable.
I think you need to put a camera and a lot of tufts in the tail and then go fly.
Yeah.
Yes, I've looked into the racing guys have got these very neat pressure recording multi-point setups, and I was thinking if those are not outrageously expensive, I might have a go with that.
They are, unfortunately.
And
Wow.
a cheaper next stage is I was going to get my A&P to take out the front seat, come up sitting in the back seat, and then he or a small colleague could lie in the footwells and see what's going on there. Because there's a really interesting phenomenon. When you have the heat on, your outer leg on both sides is really hot, but the inner leg is warm. So it's as though the hot air is fighting the cold air.
So you have the heater ducts go through the sidewalls to the back seats.
Okay.
And depending on how the side panels are installed, you can impede the airflow, because we fought that on our twin Comanche. Carpet would actually just get in there and impede the airflow.
Right.
And so it would be really hot, but have no flow.
Hey, Paul, if a customer of yours asked you to go up on a test flight like that, would you have a special shop rate that you would use for that?
Well, if he was a good pilot, it would be better. If it's the one I was worried about, I might double the rate or something. But, I used to do this with Dad when I was in grade school. I flew the 210 that one time while he went in back and watched the gear come up. In the wheel.
I did that in my Cardinal. I laid on my belly and watched that stuff move up and down.
Sometimes you have to do that.
Hey, if you're desperate.
Yeah, I don't think I would be above pulling floor panels up and taking the back seats out and just go around and see if you can feel where the air is coming in. I know it feels like it's coming in the back wall, but if you pull floor panels up and it's coming in anywhere else, you may be able to feel it there before it gets to the tail cone.
That's a good thought. I mean, we're perfectly prepared to do anything now, really, because I kind of bought the aircraft with no faults, and after 6 years, I've cracked most of the 20 or 30 it had, but I haven't cracked this one.
It's always been like this, right?
Yeah, from the day the French pilots that delivered it from Paris got out of the aeroplane and sort of rushed in to a warm room, desperate
coffee.
to
Desperate.
defrost.
Wow.
That was in January, January time.
Oh gosh.
Mm.
Yeah, this is, man, I don't know that I've ever seen one with this much effort, because you've obviously done your research. And I had the same thing on my single and was able to resolve it with some of the things that you've already done. The scoop that sucks the air out, I even tried turning it around backwards just to see what would happen, and it didn't fix it. It created a new problem.
Made it worse, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my iteration with that at the moment is I've got the scat hose disconnected.
I did that too.
But secured behind the bulkhead. So
Right.
I thought that would be a way for pressure to relieve itself, as it were, but it's made no difference at all.
Yeah. This new development with the heater in the front, that's a little strange.
It's quite dramatic. We were given an unexpected climb, and my upper body's relative cold, and your legs are quite warm. You pitch up, and in a second, the whole front of the cockpit is warm.
Huh.
So that really, the nose gear doors don't seal great on the twin Comanche, and if you pitch up, I mean, obviously you got something in the belly. You're getting more air pressure, and the
Mixing,
nose, the nose wheel area is just this big open cavity. And I'm wondering if maybe you've got I assume you've taken the bonnet off the front to check out the hoses and stuff.
Oh yes, it's been apart lots of times, but never with the focus on looking for ways that air could be getting through the cabin forward bulkhead. Only casual inspection. So that's certainly something we'll be attacking.
Yeah.
This recent change has only happened in the last few days.
Well, maybe this recent change will lead you to the original problem. I mean, it seems odd that it would be up in the front, but I wouldn't put it past a twin Comanche to be that devious.
Yes. No, I can see that. Anyway, you've encouraged me. I would have hated it really if you'd suddenly said, "Well, it's that always happens with the."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been really annoying.
Well, so I'm on a
That was Paul's next line.
I'm on a little thing with the twin Comanches because I owned one for 14 years, and I don't know what it's called in other countries, but in the States, everyone wants to call it a Twinkie, and it just hurts my feelings because it's a really cool airplane.
That's so cute.
No, that's the problem. It shouldn't be cute. So we always called it a Twindian. I thought that seemed a little more, something. I don't know.
Yeah, just a twin com over here. So
Twin.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Definitely not Twinkie. Just don't say Twinkie.
Say
That's
Twinkie.
just wrong.
Well, thanks a lot for
I
trying.
don't think
anyway.
you're allowed to say. I don't think you're allowed to say Twindian anymore.
That's true.
That's right.
I don't know. I don't know what you're allowed to say anymore. I'm afraid to talk most of the time.
Don't say anything, Paul.
I'll be quiet. I'm done.
Yeah, Jim, do you smell any exhaust in the cabin
No,
or no carbon monoxide?
no, it's.
Do you have a detector?
Well, yes, but anyway, there's so much airflow you wouldn't notice the carbon dioxide.
It's a COVID approved cabin.
It's a COVID approved.
Yeah. He's measuring his CO in parts per billion.
Yeah, we've had a lot of trouble with the nearly new C&D heater. So pretty well every bit of the heater system's been off and scat replaced and all the rest of it. The only other slightly suspicious thing is that with all the vents shut down, you can still feel airflow with the heater off. Not a dramatic amount, but a small amount. So the one thing I haven't done is de-rivet the box where it diverts the air in different directions with slider controls. That's the end. But I can't see that. I find it hard to believe that's the real source.
Well, you have to look where it could be, where it couldn't be, and where it couldn't possibly be.
Keep on going.
Yeah. I wish I had the answer for you.
Well,
Yeah.
the good news is summer's right around the corner, so
Yes, and
hopefully you can make it.
I'm going to fly at low altitude for the
That's
next
right.
next few months. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you very much for encouraging me to keep trying.
Keep going, Jim. You'll get it.
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
so much, Jim. It's a very interesting question.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay.
So before I introduce Sam, who's our next caller, I have to tell you that. So one of the things we learned about Charlie Taylor while we were here is that the Wright brothers drew up the design for this engine that he built, and then like it took him 6 weeks, what with a hacksaw and
A chisel or
a
something.
chisel, sandpaper. I don't know. So he built this 4-cylinder engine. And they were supposed to get, I think, 8 horsepower, and they ended up with 12. But he did it in like record
6
time.
weeks. Yeah, longer. It would take longer to get your engine overhauled these days.
Oh yeah,
way longer.
Much longer.
Yeah, and he didn't have to order cylinders from
Yeah.
Continental or Lycoming. I think that's what saved him. Maybe
And
that
there were
was-
no ADs on this engine. when it came out.
no ADs.
Yeah, he built it out of all owner-produced parts.
That's right.
That's-
The man's a genius.
He is genius, definitely, absolutely. Anyway, so our next question is from Sam. Hey, Sam, who's exploring the basics of prop balancing. What you got, Sam?
Yeah, so I just noticed that some exhaust manufacturers will extend their warranty if you have your prop periodically balanced, and it just started me thinking about, gee whiz, should if they're willing to extend their warranties, then maybe there's some real true value in having your prop periodically balanced. So
There
that's
is.
what I'm trying to understand is, is there a value in having dynamic balancing? Is there a best way to do it? Should you do it right after overhaul or mid overhaul, or what kind of periodicity is appropriate? And is there any value to static balancing?
Well, your
There's a whole
propeller
bunch
will
of
come.
It's all about that general topic.
Yeah,
It should come static balance.
yeah, it'll
out of
come
the shop.
static balanced
Yeah.
out of the shop. Absolutely.
But after that, it's up to you. You can dynamically balance it when you put it back on the engine. The dynamic balance is going to check the balance interplay between the engine and the airframe and the prop. So that's why the shop doesn't do a dynamic
And the
balance.
spinner and the bulkhead.
Yeah, the whole system.
So
right.
dynamic prop balancing is a bit of a misnomer because you're really balancing the entire power plant
Right.
assembly, which is something that, of course, you're not doing when the prop is statically balanced. So you start off with a statically balanced prop, but that doesn't mean that when it's mounted on the engine with a spinner and a spinner back plate and stuff all assembled, that it's still going to be well balanced. That's what the dynamic balance is for.
And it's something that an A&P should do for you.
You'll have
Or
to have the equipment.
you have to have the equipment to do it, but it's not a big deal. It doesn't take that long, and it can make a big difference. And
Typically there are mobile guys that go around doing this stuff.
with a briefcase. They come to your hangar with a briefcase.
Yeah.
It's got the gear in it.
And the exhaust system, so you imagine the engine is shaking all the time, and all the rotating parts especially are dealing with all this vibration, magnetos, all those things. But in addition to that, your exhaust system is hanging on the bottom, and its distance from the center of all this vibration is more than anything else on the engine. So the exhaust guys, and I don't know who's offering better warranties, Power Flow maybe, or something like that.
Right.
You reduce some of that shaking, and it significantly reduces the wear and tear. And if you have it dynamically balanced, don't assume that you're going to get in the airplane and that your butt's going to notice that you've dynamically balanced this engine. The engine will notice. You may not notice, but and they'll test it. They'll run it first and see the inches per second diversion that the engine has, and when they get done, they'll know what it has, and it will be a significant change more than likely. But you may not be able to feel it, so don't use that as a basis. Look at the data, and it will make a difference.
I'm hoping my compass stops shaking as much as it does.
Oh,
But
Probably
now-
will.
So
Yeah.
what airplane is this?
this is a 172, Mike.
Is it mounted to the windshield?
No, it's mounted to the
the panel.
To the
panel.
the glare
Yeah.
shield? Okay. If it's mounted
Yeah,
to the
glare shield,
windshield,
right.
it won't quit shaking. Because the windshield's getting the prop pulses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may make a big difference.
And another thing you risk is maybe cracking your spinner bulkhead where the spinner attaches to the prop, and that's expensive. You don't want that to happen. So there's lots of reasons why it would be great to get good balance.
Okay, and what kind of period is this? Once during an overhaul period, or is it more than once? How do you? What's the right way to go about it?
I think you do it when your compass is shaking.
It's a good detector.
I mean, there's no prescribed time. I
No.
think if you sense something's out, that might, or if you changed some
Right.
parameter, like put a new exhaust on or put a new spinner on, that might do it.
Or a big chip in the prop.
Or
out
an
near the
overhaul.
end.
Yeah. So
If you
it's
don't
kind
change anything, it's not going to change.
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's exactly what I was looking for. And
Cool.
Is there any type of dynamic balancing that's better than another? Any,
think
there are different
all the
systems, I
same.
think.
I think it's all the same.
Well, there's
Yeah.
only a couple of them, right?
Yeah.
There's Microvibe and there's Chadwick Helmuth.
Yeah.
Chadwick Helmuth got
Never.
bought by some other company. I don't remember
I
what
know
they're called now,
Microvibe. Yeah. They're pretty standard.
But
It
yeah, the
just depends on-
Microvibe, nice system.
It has a lot to do with the abilities of the person operating the equipment, how closely they can get it, how they can get the weights in the right place.
Mhm.
It takes some practice.
Yeah.
Your inches per second, if you can get it down to 0.02, 0.01, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that would be
Hard-
nice.
That'd be really nice. That's hard to do. But yeah, it's definitely, and it's not very expensive. I
Yeah,
don't know,
it's-
$300 or something?
Yeah.
Not much at all.
I mean, how
Yeah.
much benefit you get out of it depends on how bad it is to begin with. You know,
That's true.
there
Well,
are
this is
times when
$100.
they'll hook up the rig on an airplane and do the test and say, yeah, just let's leave it alone because it's
Yeah,
pretty doggone good. You know, but
I've never seen that happen.
And it's an iterative process. So they run it, and then the machine recommends where to put the weights, and they put some weights on, they run it again, and maybe they put more weights somewhere
fine
else.
tune
So
it a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, so it goes back and forth, but you can get it down pretty quickly.
Yeah, it may take
All right.
3 or 4
Thank you very
runs.
much. Appreciate your help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate the question, Sam. It's a good one.
All right, take care, Sam.
You bet.
Before our next guest, another factoid about Charles Taylor. In 1911, he was paid $70 a week to accompany a Wright aircraft that was relocated from Long Island to California. He followed the aircraft in a train and did repairs every night on the way across the country.
Oh, gosh,
$70 a week. What a guy.
what a guy.
Wish I
Well,
could get that help nowadays.
Was
Okay.
That would have been a bonus from his 30 cents an hour. wouldn't
I
it?
don't know if it was on top of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Arnold is our next guest, and he is wondering how much fuel he's got on board. Go ahead, Arnold.
So it's my first experience asking for your help. So if I ask the wrong questions, just stop me.
Well, it's our first experience giving you help, so we're all even.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. So prior to buying a 1987 Bonanza F-33A, about a year and a couple of months ago, I flew turbine aircraft, and then I ran into an aging out of the turbine market insurance issues. So I've switched over to the Bonanza, which I'm finding is a lovely airplane. One of the first things that I did was some upgrades on an already fairly nice 35-year-old plane. So I redid the entire avionics panel at Nexair and Avionics in Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Good job. Yeah.
Yep. Good job.
And they did great work, and literally threw everything out but the storm scope and started over with Garmin 500 PFD, 2750s, ADSB in and out, XM weather, the Garmin engine instrument system. So the panel is completely redone and new. The problem is that the size senders, and there are 2 in each of the 40-gallon bladders, the left one read perfectly as a correlation of A the fuel flow computer from Garmin, and B, multiple fill-ups that I documented to the nearest tenth of a gallon. The right tank, however, is rather strange in its behavior. In the right tank, it showed the maximum of 37 usable gallons, although if you drain the bladders and fill them from zero, they hold 41.5 gallons on each side, of which Beechcraft says 3 are unusable on each side. The problem that I'm dealing with and have been for the last 6 or 8 months is as I fly and use fuel from the right tank, the right rubber fuel bladder, the tank starts to read low as soon as you use perhaps 5 gallons out of a full right tank. The left tank always reads exactly right, as did the previous analog Beechcraft gauges, which were original. So noting that this was reading 4 to 6 gallons low in flight was disconcerting for me as a pilot, because I would hit the yellow and then I could eventually get to zero on the right side when I wasn't at zero and still had perhaps 5 or 6 usable gallons on the right side. So the long and the short of it is the avionics shop, which was excellent, and my mechanic at Shoreline in Marshfield tried everything they could think of to fix it, starting with SICE, the fuel sender company, who actually decided to replace both senders for total. That did not fix the problem. Recalibration done 3 times by jacking up the plane, leveling it according to the factory specs, and fueling it in 15 increments of about 2-point-something gallons per increment. Did not solve the problem. Replacing the 2 O-rings in each fuel cap didn't solve the problem. Checking for any blockage in the fuel tank vents on the right did not solve the problem. Finally, the last thing that happened before I corresponded with Ian was there was a question of whether the clips that hold the top of the tank to the undersurface of the wing might have become disconnected. And so we actually opened the right side tank up, and the mechanic reached inside, found that one clip just lateral to the inboard entrance was not properly affixed, and that was reclipped, and that didn't solve the problem.
Oh.
So the logic that I am using is as follows, and forgive me if I'm talking too much. The only way it can read low is to depress the float, and it uses frequency response. It does not use a variable resistance wiper arm. So either you push the float down so it reads low, or you depress the tank in such a way that the rubber pushes the float down when part of the tank is emptied of fuel. So we tried to find whether that was possible, including borescoping the tank, and there's no impediment, no impingement on the float at either the inboard float or the outboard float. And when you land the plane on the ground, when it's no longer in the air, no longer has any ram air effect, the fuel tank reads exactly right. So the problem is only a problem in flight, and the problem is not a function of the pitch attitude of the airplane. The left tank remains correct in slow flight, in high-speed flight, which would be various pitch attitudes. The right tank reads 4 to 6 low, and I basically am hoping you can give us some place to go next, because essentially everybody has given up.
So I have a question. I'm not a Bonanza guy, I've seen this on Cessnas where the inside of the wing can get pressurized and actually collapse the bladder, but only in flight. And once you land, all that pressure bleeds out and the bladder returns to its normal shape. Is that possible?
And you are 100% correct that if you pressurized the wing tank, so to speak, and that pressure increased the pressure on the rubber bladder, what would happen is it would lift the bottom of the rubber bladder up, which would read higher, not lower.
Not necessarily.
Well, yes, necessarily, because the flotation measuring device is anchored to the upper portion of the wing. It is not just anchored to the rubber bladder. Were that the case, I would agree, but there's no way that you can move the actual anchoring and the electronic portion of the SICE senders. All you can do, and we can't figure out how this could happen, is push the float down lower, either the inboard or the outboard, and it would have to be the inboard because it reads low at a point where there is no outboard escalation or elevation.
So what we're saying though is if there's movement in the bladder, like lifting the bladder from the bottom, and so if the outboard sending unit increases when it should be decreasing, meaning the inboard has decreased, I don't know how the system interprets that. And you could empty the tank and just go out there and with the two floats all the way at the bottom, just lift the outboard float and see what sort of display you get. Will that actually show an increase in fuel level, or would that show a decrease in fuel level if the outboard float level is higher than the inboard?
Then it and that has to work that way, or you couldn't make a turn in the airplane and get a correct reading. Right. So that in itself is another issue. But if it read high, I think it would be much easier to make the diagnosis by saying the fuel load must be lifting up from the bottom of the wing, but it's reading low.
Right.
And then when there's no air load, it comes back to normal. And that's, I think, the enigma that no one that I've spoken with so far has been able to figure out. All of the data from the fuel usage was downloaded. The Garmin 500 allows a download, and it went out to the president of SICE, asked for all the download data, reviewed it, and could not figure out what's going on. And I must tell you, I was absolutely certain that the lack of a pin connector being properly latched, if you will, to the top of the wing was allowed the rubber bladder to fall down with air pressure, hit the float, and lower the float. And I thought, well, there's the answer. Nothing else fits, and that was wrong. So that's why I need your help.
So here's how I look at things. So you've done all the head part, and you're thinking that can't be it, that can't be it, that can't be it. I think a little differently. When all the I can't be it's tell me it can't be it, I have to go in and put my hands on it. And so I start experimenting and finding out, well, what happens when I do this and what happens when I do that? You know, maybe the bladder collapses from the front and makes contact, or from the rear as opposed to from the bottom, and lifting it. Maybe it's just impeding the movement from the front. What I'm saying is, if everything else fails, then I don't start using logic to eliminate what might not cause it, and I go out there and see if I can make that cause it.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yes, it does. You know, you could cause it if you could push the float down.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, because that would cause it to read lower fuel.
Right.
But
we've been talking about all the things that can't possibly make that happen. And I would just have to go out and see, well, maybe I can make that happen by pushing the bladder in.
Hey, Paul, let me ask a question. This may be an idea that you reject out of hand.
Oh, I'd never reject that.
But
The crazier they are, the better.
in the interest of seeing, is there any way we could duplicate this on the ground? Because it makes it a whole lot easier to troubleshoot if you can do it on the
Sure.
ground.
And more legal.
I don't think we can pressurize the wing very well on the ground. But what if you applied a small vacuum to the
tank.
to the
Oh,
vent?
that's a great
Sure.
idea. Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to put a huge vacuum in there and pull out all the clips, but just, if you could
yeah.
put a small controllable vacuum on there and
Yeah, so
see
if
if
you're
you can
thinking-
duplicate the issue on the ground.
Yeah.
I think
that
that's
would
an
make it-
awesome idea.
Right.
Oh,
And-
wow. I'm
No,
impressed.
I like it. But now
Yeah.
here's what you want to be careful of on a metal tank like a Cessna 210, which I have a lot of experience with.
Yeah, this is a
The
bladder,
most
though.
vacuum you want to put on this thing is like a half a PSI, which you're not going to do with certain things. So you're going to have to get creative in how to create this vacuum and how to measure the vacuum that you're putting on.
Mhm.
A typical pressure gauge is not going to be the thing to use. So you can fabricate or purchase a manometer. It's a great thing to use for this. What we use when we pressurize tanks to look for leaks. So that's what I would go with. And creating vacuums, many shops will have a tool that we would create a vacuum on an instrument system to
Yeah.
create flow through
Yeah,
the
it's a Venturi. You put shop air through
Creates
it, and
that.
a little vacuum comes out. Yeah.
So you hook that up with a manometer so that you don't create 5 Hg or 10 Hg. You want something much, much less than that, maybe
Well,
one
how
or
about
two.
how about just a suck vacuum? Like a straw. It just
Doesn't
I don't think you can create
no,
enough,
you-
and
I
you
don't
die
think
in the
so.
process of inhaling all the fumes. So
the
Yeah.
fumes.
But wouldn't like the famous airborne test kit that
yeah,
you can rent?
that's what I was talking about. Yeah.
That would have all of the stuff that you need
Have
to.
all the stuff
to
you need,
do that.
except for I don't know that you can measure a negative. We normally connect our manometer, and you have to be really careful how you approach how much vacuum you're creating, because it'll create enough to suck that bag down in a hurry.
Wow.
But that would be an interesting.
Well, you could
really-
stick a camera down there while you were sucking, right?
Yeah.
And just look at the top of the bag
Yeah.
and see what's happening.
And you
So-
might do it because this will be relatively safe with fuel in the tank
Mhm.
because it's not an electric motor. It's no, you want to ground everything, ground everything, ground the airplane, ground the test equipment, because you're creating a lot of airflow with fumes. So just do it outside. Do not do it inside the building.
Thank you all again.
Thank
All right,
you, Arnold.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Appreciate the
coming on.
question.
My pleasure.
So we have a question from Keith, but I have to start with a little factoid here about Charlie Taylor. And this was like really disappointing that Charlie Taylor wanted to learn how to fly, but the Wright brothers said, no, we need you in the shop. It's a terrible thing, because Blake, who's our director of maintenance, I'm doing everything I can to get him to go fly. So when customers come in and say, hey, the engine hiccuped, I want mechanics to understand that sense of panic when that engine hiccups. So, we have a whole different attitude about getting it fixed.
That's right.
So anyway, our next question is from Keith, who took the plunge and bought a turbo normalized Bonanza,
Yeah.
and now wants to be sure he treats it well, which is always a good thought. Hey, Keith, how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks so much. Really enjoy the podcast. It's really been helpful to me in my growth as a pilot, now owner of a plane.
Mhm.
Excellent.
A nice one too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, when I bought it, it wasn't turbo normalized, and a few trips over the Rockies convinced me that was something I should consider. And as I started investigating it and asking around, I inadvertently stumbled into perhaps one of the greatest controversies in all of aviation, which is whether to turbo normalize or not. And I was really surprised at how almost diametrically opposed the two camps were. Those that were in favor and saw a lot of value in having it and had great experience, and those who said I was going to risk my life because turbo normalized engines run through cylinders very, very quickly and have other issues. And there was a risk of flight and flight emergency risk that I certainly didn't want to increase by any means. So I continued my thoughtful investigation. Ultimately, sent the plane over to Ada, Oklahoma to get it turbo normalized and got it done and picked it up in February. And I love it. It's great.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
it's really, really great. But in the back of my mind are all of these cautionary tales. So my question's really around, is it even true? Is it even true that turbo normalizing, this is a Continental IL 550B, does it shorten cylinder life? Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
question. I notice your name on the screen has the letter CT after it. Does that stand for Connecticut?
It does. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Well, that explains all of this. You know, I grew up
we're going to get some
here
emails
comes the
about
hate
this.
mail. Yeah.
I grew up in New York and went to school up in New England and learned to fly. And when I was in the Northeast United States, everybody was bad mouthing turbocharging.
Huh.
And then I wound up moving to California, and I've been an aircraft owner now for 50 some odd years, and about half of that time I owned normally aspirated airplanes, and the other half of the time I owned a turbocharged airplane. It really is turbo normalized because it's redlined at 32 inches.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I would never again buy a normally aspirated airplane unless it was purely for recreational purposes, like a float plane or something like that. But any airplane that you're using to get from point A to point B, I would never again buy a normally aspirated airplane. I'm a total turbocharging bigot, and I've been flying behind a pair of turbocharged Continentals now for 30 some odd years, so anything you hear in the Northeast United States about this is a lie. Don't pay any attention to it.
Wow.
Great.
Oh, this is
Well,
going to be trouble. I just hear trouble.
To be perfectly fair, a turbocharged engine can be abused more easily
Sure.
than a normally aspirated engine, because at altitude, Mother Nature prevents you from abusing a normally aspirated engine. The turbocharged engine always thinks it's at sea level, so
Right.
so you can abuse it anytime you want to, but assuming you don't plan to abuse it. And oh, by the way, for example, I know when Tornado Alley turbocharged the SR-22, and that's a beautiful installation, by the way, the SR-22TN. But they started recommending that people fly that airplane at 80% power. And if you fly the engine at 80% power, you're probably going to wind up going through some cylinders on the way to TBO. It's just, there's no free lunch in the world, But if you fly it at 65% power, you probably aren't going to go through cylinders on the way to TBO. So you have the ability to abuse the engine, but that doesn't mean you have to use it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I kind of chalked up a lot of the naysaying to user error, or in that you call it abusing the privilege of higher power at higher altitude.
You don't suppose any of it's jealousy, do you?
Ooh,
No.
I like that.
No.
I didn't go there.
Another thing to keep in mind is that turbochargers typically don't last as long as cylinders do. So over time, I've been through quite a few turbochargers in the 33 years that I've had my airplane. I've got 2 turbochargers. And I've typically gotten about 1,500 hours between turbocharger replacements. When I talked to Gary Main about this, he said, on the average, people get about 1,000 hours out of a turbocharger. So I'm doing better than average. But it's perfectly normal to have to replace the turbocharger at least once on the way to TBO.
And you're referring to
several times if you go to multiples of TBO like I do.
And you're referring, when you say replace the turbocharger, you're really referring to the moving parts, the turbine itself, right? That needs to be
I mean,
replaced.
there are a couple of reasons that the turbocharger will need replacement. One of them is that the turbine blades will creep to the point where they're starting to scrape on the housing. Another is that the housing will start to crack. The problems are almost always with the hot section of the turbocharger. That's the one that works real hard.
That makes
But
sense.
we have to inspect them quite carefully at each annual inspection, and eventually you won't like what you're seeing, and you'll say it's time to change the turbocharger.
And pay attention to the oil delivery and oil suction from the turbos as well. You have check valves in those, and sometimes people will complain, "Oh, my turbo's shot because all this blue oil comes out when I start the engine," and it's not the turbo's fault. It's because the check valve isn't working, and engine oil is being siphoned into the turbo.
Are there check valves on the Bonanza system? It really depends on where the turbo is mounted, whether it's mounted high or low.
I sure hope they're not, because I'm not aware of them. So I just means I didn't study enough. So
I think they are, because your turbos blow the engine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And you have to have check valves.
Yeah, if the turbocharger is down low, then you need.
So
check
do you
valves.
have to clean them, Paul? Can they get stuck?
They can get stuck. They can fail. They get old, so they stick open. They stick closed, depending on which one they are. And the failure mode is different, whether it's the inlet that sticks or the outlet that sticks. Because the outlet is in the scavenge pump, and if you can't scavenge the oil out, then all the oil packs in, or it goes out the exhaust while you're flying.
Mm-hmm.
So those need to be inspected. I would say like every 1,000 hours, and we're not talking a big expense.
That's not a lot. Yeah, that's pretty
good.
So
much.
That can be done during the annual inspections.
Sure.
As an extra or something. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that I should do as the owner operator on a pre-flight basis, other than wiggling the tailpipe and those sorts of things? Is there anything I should be looking for, either with the cylinders or just what mistakes do you see pilots making beyond what Mike said about running it at too high a power or too high
keep the CHTs below 400 or 380 if you can, and that's the biggest thing.
In other words, nothing on the turbo itself.
Another mistake that I see pilots make a lot, and that your question just triggered, is an obsession with keeping manifold pressure below red line. If you take off in the airplane, especially if it's the first takeoff of the day where the oil isn't real warm, it's perfectly normal for the manifold pressure to go a little bit above red line. And if you try to compensate with that by pulling back the throttle, that's really bad for the engine, because when you pull back the throttle, you're reducing the fuel flow, and so you just let the overboost happen. There's a pressure relief valve there, so that overboost can't be enough to damage anything. And Continental has a service bulletin that basically says, an overboost of 2 to 3 inches on takeoff is essentially a non-event, and it tends to be self-correcting. Once the oil warms up, it comes right back down to where it should be. But if the thing chronically overboosts, the solution is to adjust the controller so it doesn't overboost, not to try to compensate from inside the cockpit, because that's just a bad thing to do.
Okay. That's super, super helpful. I understand now I need to move from Connecticut to California, but I'll work on that part.
No,
And
you,
then,
you just need to commute back and forth from California to Connecticut.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's
Stop
it.
in
That's it.
Tennessee.
Yeah, definitely
I-
stop
I-
in Tennessee.
I've been in Tennessee a few
Paul,
times.
Paul's got a really
Best
nice
barbecue.
guest bedroom.
Yeah. We'll take care of you.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
great
Keith,
question,
thanks
Keith.
for the,
Thanks.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, you made a good decision putting that turbo normalizing kit in the
Yeah.
plane. I know it wasn't cheap.
No, they're not cheap. They're not cheap, and I am very happy with it. I just want to make sure I remain happy with it. So hence the
Yeah.
call. Thanks again.
Yep. All right, Keith, we'll see you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
We have a quick factoid about Charles Taylor. He died 8 years after Orville in 1956 and is buried in a famous aviation cemetery in Burbank, California.
Oh.
So go see him. Go pay him a visit.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next caller is Ben, who wants to start tinkering with his plane but doesn't want to draw the FAA's attention. That's
Good
really
call.
smart.
Always a good plan.
Good
Go
plan.
ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
Hey, Colleen. Hey, Mike and Paul. Nice to meet you. I'm a longtime listener, first-time caller. I have a 1969 Bonanza E33A that's kept at Fullerton Airport. And fun fact, Colleen, I'll be in San Diego visiting my mom this weekend, so I'll wave at you as I fly by.
I'll look for you.
Excellent. So I just have a quick question for you. We have sliding rear individual seats. They're limited fore and aft on their tracks at each end with a small bolt and lock nut. Removing the bolt and nut allow you to remove the seat from either side of the rear, and which greatly increases the usable cargo space. However, removing these bolts and tiny nuts is time consuming and frustrating because of very small clearances to get to the heads of those fasteners, and also, of course, the requirement of tools. So I have a two-part question for you. The first is, am I required to hold a signed off weight and balance by my A&P IA for the plane without rear seats installed, or can I just do the math with station values from the POH and weight values for the individual seats? And part two is, can I replace the tedious bolts and nuts with some kind of a fast pin to aid in the removal of the rear seats, or is this considered too great a modification to qualify as not appreciably changing the aircraft? And I learned one thing since I submitted this question to you. There is a certificated part for an F-33 later model Bonanza where there is a fast pin and a bracket to replace that bolt. So there is a certificated part available. So I guess the real question is, can I use that piece in my aircraft?
That's interesting. Can I take the first part? Because I had the very same question with my Cardinal. I want to fly with the back seat out all the time. And it requires an A&P to do a modified weight and balance for your plane. But all you have to do is pay that A&P once to give you another weight and balance without one of the seats. Maybe, I'm not sure if he'd have to do the left and the right in separate configurations. But once you have that piece of paper, you can fly around with that in your plane and just take the seats out and you'd be covered. So you wouldn't have to do it every time you removed a seat. So the first part has to be done by an A&P, unfortunately, even though it's very basic math. Sorry.
So basically, what you need is two signed off weight and balance documents. We'll call them A and B.
Yes.
Now, if we want to get really technical about this, removal and reinstallation of those seats is one of the 41 items that are considered to be preventive maintenance that an owner is allowed to do.
Yay.
So technically, if you remove the seat, you really should make a logbook entry that said, I removed the seats and weight and balance B is now in effect. And if you put the seats back, you should make another logbook entry saying, I reinstalled the seats and weight and balance A is now in effect.
Good
now,
point.
Would you ever get busted for not doing that? I don't think so. But if you want to get really technical, that's what you're supposed to do. But removing and reinstalling seats is actually explicitly called out in Part 43, Appendix A, little c.
That was easy.
And then the number 2 part, I want to hear about this quick fastener because it's even harder to take them out of the Cardinal. There's all kinds of bolts.
It won't fit on your Cardinal.
Damn. All right. Well, I still want to hear about it, but as far as I've been able to find out, because I thought about quick release fasteners too, it's a no-no. You have to use the original bolts. But what do you think, Paul? Could he use the fastener from the Bonanza?
I think that, especially if it's something that's approved on a newer airplane on the same style seat rail, if it physically fits, I wouldn't have any grief about putting those on. I'd make a log entry. To me, that's a minor alteration, and it's something on a newer plane. If you just take one fastener out and put another one in, now because you're dealing with fasteners in the parts catalog, it calls out a specific piece of hardware. So if you deviate from that specific piece of hardware, I think you want to have some basis on which you make the deviation. So I may be wrong on the FAA part, but it wouldn't bother me a bit to do that.
So take it to Paul's shop, and he'll sign you out.
I think you could do that.
But also, if this was in a later model airplane and it's easily retrofittable into the earlier model airplane, you almost certainly could get a field approval for something like that if you wanted to.
If you wanted to get a sign off by the FAA, sure.
Yeah, you might even be able to get keep the FAA out of it and get a no technical objection letter from Beach or something. That would I would probably try for that first, because I would always rather leave the FAA out of it if possible.
Did you look to see if there was a service bulletin that allowed you to use the newer hardware on the older airplanes?
No, I haven't.
Oh man, you got to go do your research.
Okay.
I'll bet you there's already something that allows you to do that.
Oh, that would be the easiest.
Wouldn't a call to Textron product support be able to get you answers?
They might look that up for you. You can find out yourself, but you have to dig through a whole bunch of service bulletins. But yeah, I would call product support, see what that yields. The American Bonanza Society, if there's something out there, they already know about it.
Yeah.
But I would venture a guess that there's already some sort of approval to do that. Yeah. Okay. And it probably won't cost you any money.
But if you take it to Paul's shop, he'll sign it off as a minor alteration. He's already committed to that in front of God.
Gosh, and I did it on the. Is this recording? Are we recording this?
Yes.
I think I'm in trouble. But that's what I do, isn't it? Oh man.
Well, does that answer the question, Ben?
It does. Yes. Thank you very much for your expertise.
I like the way you're thinking. Now, if you get your A&P, you can do your own weight and balance. Sounds like you're fully capable now.
Hey, and then he can sign it off, and I won't be in trouble. This is good.
That's right. That would be even better. Yeah, let's get
even better.
Awesome. That's the plan.
All right. Thanks for the question. That was fun.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you very much.
And we'll see you. So just a point about, since we're here talking about Charles Taylor, or Charlie Taylor, as the people around here call it, there is a Charles Taylor Award for A&Ps, and you have to hold a certificate. Did we figure out if you had to hold a certificate for 50 years or just be in aircraft maintenance for 50 years?
I think it said a certificate.
Oh, gosh, I won't be able to do that forever. Anyway, they have to be a U.S. citizen and not ever having it have been revoked. So when you meet people that have the Charles Taylor Award, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So anyway, very cool.
They're probably retired.
They're probably, most people retire when they get it, or they get it and then retire suddenly. Yeah. That's how that works. So anyway, so Kyle's here. Hey, Kyle. And
hi there.
He can't seem to keep either of his airplanes in top shape. So that sounds like a real problem here.
I can relate to that.
That's right, Colleen. The only thing worse than one engine issue is two engine issues.
That's right.
Absolutely right.
I do own two airplanes, which are kept at KBJC near Boulder, Colorado, and each has a vexing engine issue at the moment. The first one is a 2005 Cessna Turbo 182 with a Lycoming TIO 540. And I acquired that in 2001 with about 930 hours on the TAC. And now we're at about 1,870 on this first run engine. But the symptoms on this one really came back to noticing a bit of morning sickness in the last half dozen flight hours or so. And in reviewing the engine data on the Savvy platform, we determined it was worth doing the wobble test. Now, incidentally, my Cessna Service Center said that no one had ever asked them to do the wobble test, so that was sort of novel. Be that as it may. The measurements were reported at 23 to 25 thousandths across 5 of the cylinders, and then on the number 2, we were down to just 4 thousandths. And so, upon a closer visual inspection, the pushrod tube housing on that cylinder was slightly bent, and in the rocker cover housing, some cylindrical metal pieces. So we pulled the pushrod tube. The pushrod itself was slightly bent, and the lifter body was damaged, or the tappet, specifically in that the last quarter inch of that body closest to the pushrod had cracked off, which was what was in the rocker cover housing there. And of course, with the flat tappets on this engine, it requires splitting the case to replace that part. So this seems like the classic lose-lose proposition, but obviously what I've wrestled with here is the IRAN or the overhaul or the reman or fill in the blank. And we know it's not a great time for any of those things, but be that as it may, here we are.
Boy, an IRAN seems like the answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is funny because frequently we'll get questions like this about, well, should I overhaul or not? And to me, the answer is always, well, have them disassemble the engine and measure everything and give you the reports, and then you can decide how far you want them to go. You don't have to decide when you ship them the engine. You can make that decision after it's all apart on a couple of roll-around carts.
So look and see. Yep.
Paul, this fracture of the
lifter,
of the hydraulic lifter body in there,
the cam follower,
isn't that normally due to a isn't that normally a maintenance induced failure?
Yeah. So the norm, because the lifter body doesn't have any real side loads on it, so the push rod has to either get out of position or bend, or someone's doing a wobble test, and in that process the push rod gets out of place and puts a side load on it. So it is, when I've seen it occur, it's typically maintenance induced. It seems pretty obvious in this case. You had a stuck valve, and then everything bends and breaks as a part of that. But once the valve unsticks, even that bent push rod, it'll sit there and run it forever, and this little chunk of steel just kind of floats around. Once it gets into the push rod tube, it doesn't really do any harm. It can just float around for a while. But then that valve will eventually stick, and pretty soon the valve's not opening at all.
Yeah, of course, that begs an interesting set of other challenges as far as how to prove whether it was maintenance induced or otherwise. But that's a challenge. That's a whole nother follow-up.
Right now.
Yeah. And that could have happened, who knows when, a long time ago at some point.
Yeah.
It just doesn't show up now until now. So I don't even know that you would pursue that. But I think an IRAN is definitely your engine issue. I know you, 1,870 hours on the engine?
Right.
But when you take the bottom end of that engine apart, I would venture a guess, this being a 2005, it's probably going to look clean as a whistle.
Right. Let it speak to you.
Yeah.
You'll know when you see it.
Anytime the case is split, there's a man and replace all the main bearings, all the thrust washers, all that stuff. So basically the bottom end is going to get a complete refresh no matter what its condition.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so the only decision you're going to have to make at that point is whether you want to do something with the cylinders, or whether you hone them lightly and put new rings in them, or just leave them alone. But the right time to make that decision is after the engine's apart and they've measured everything.
Yeah, because you don't want to be looking for new cylinders
still
right
within
now.
service limit. Yeah, if the cylinders are not within service limits, maybe you want to have them taken oversized, put in some rings. Just wait until you know what you got before you decide how far that you want the engine shop to go with it.
And you can always do new cylinders later. Once you get the engine together with rework cylinders, or leave the cylinders like they are, you don't even have to take the pistons out of the other 5 cylinders. They can be removed, piston pin removed, leave the pistons in the cylinders. If your oil consumption has been good, if the cross hatching on the cylinders looks good, You don't have to do anything to those cylinders.
Yeah, it's kind of a question of whether the engine shop will agree to do that.
Yeah.
That's
Some
true.
engine shops
Good point.
don't
They
want
won't
to
do
put an
that.
engine back together unless they've measured everything. So
Yeah.
that would
But-
be a good conversation to have with the engine shop probably before you
send
before
it
they
to them.
start.
Yeah. But with the backlog of parts right now, absolutely the less you can do, because I don't know what the backlog is for cylinders right now.
8
But
to 11
that could-
months on these.
Yeah. So, if you can find a cylinder shop, pop the cylinders out to a cylinder shop, have them redone, they come back, it's still going to take several months. But you're probably looking at, 3 to 6 months downtime, no matter what you do.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks were saying you typically going to see some case fretting between the halves when you split it. So then you're off to the case shop for 4 months of fun
That's
there.
Maybe.
that's not true, I don't think.
Yeah. Especially a
Those
first run
engines
engine.
are doweled, aren't they? Those engines
They are doweled. They're
Yeah,
doweled. So
the likelihood of fretting is very, very small.
yeah. And so, yeah.
Well, thank you. Let's segue to number 2 quickly and see if it's
Okay.
easier or harder. But
Okay.
the second is a small bore Continental C85 4-cylinder on a 1947 Luscombe. And we've got the 0200 crank rod and pistons. And I field overhauled the engine, owner assisted, about 500 hours ago in 2006.
Beauty.
Mhm.
It has developed a stumble in the range of about 1800, 1900 RPM upon reasonable advancement of the throttle. Well, not then, but just working through that range. And so it's just a little disconcerting in terms of touch and goes and hearing and feeling that. And I think it seems to be related to a lean fuel mixture, because if you crack a little carb heat, it does improve through that range. It doesn't go away, but it improves. I've explored a lot of simple theories related to fuel, air, and spark, sent the carb out for overhaul. No real change. Conducted induction leak test, no leaks noted. Replaced the ignition harness and tested the plugs with some nominal improvement. But in any case, it's equally vexing to me in a different way. And just curious if you've seen or heard anything similar in the past.
I don't see it being anything spark related.
Does this engine have
No.
a sniffle valve that could maybe be blocked?
Man, I don't.
That's he said
Oh.
going through 1800. I've seen
Yeah.
sniffle valves cause stumbles at low RPM or high manifold pressure.
Well, you're talking about a valve in the low point
Induction.
drain on the induction system.
Yeah. I don't know if this engine
I don't
has
know that engine would have that. I
Yeah,
don't know the little Continentals.
I think they normally only have those on turbocharged engines, don't they? Sniffle valves.
Well, no,
It's
you'll
on
have them.
My Cardinal has one.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, and the turbo will have a double valve, a double sniffle valve, so it closes on vacuum or pressure. So it only drains when there's no difference in pressure, whereas the vacuum airplanes will do it on vacuum only. I don't think these will have a sniffle valve. My first thought went right to jets, some sort of issue with the transitioning from low jets to high jets, but I don't know what power setting that happens. And you had the carburetor overhaul.
This stumbles when you're throttling up, correct?
Yeah.
Through this
That's right.
RPM range.
Yeah.
Does this carburetor have an accelerator pump?
It's a Stromberg carb, and so it really doesn't. And that low section, I think, is up till about 1200 RPM. So this would be above that in any case. Do you typically see induction leaks manifest at low or high RPM or both? I'm just curious.
Everywhere, because your induction system's always in a vacuum. So at low RPM, you have a higher vacuum or higher difference
Yeah.
between ambient and what's in the induction system.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have a manifold pressure gauge.
The only stumble I've ever seen at high RPM was in an ignition harness. There was something wrong with the harness, and replacing the harness did it. So that's my experience with a high RPM stumble. But you said you replaced that.
That's right.
Huh.
It still feels like something with the carburetor. That
Yeah.
it just feels like something with. So you had your carburetor overhauled. Can you borrow one from somebody? I don't know how many
that's
times.
a logical next step. You're right.
Yeah, I don't know how many times carburetors or fuel system component
Come back. Yeah.
pumps. You send the same one out, and somehow whatever the problem is, they don't duplicate on the bench just because it's some strange off thing. But getting someone else's, and you don't have to have it overhauled, just stick it on there. If the problem goes away, even if some other problem shows up, at least now you know it is the carburetor.
I think it has something to do with the fact that there's just not enough air up there in Denver, you know.
You're going right for the Connecticut thing again, right? It's just where they're located.
Yeah, I wonder whether there's a Marvel Schaebler carburetor that's approved for
There it
on
is.
that engine.
MA3 SPA, that's right. That'd be another one to try. Those are
I'll go
pretty
borrow
valuable
that.
and pretty scarce, but compared to the other issue we talked about, that's small bucks.
Yeah, it's small potatoes, right?
Go on to the Luscombe owners group and see if someone will volunteer their carburetor for a week and give it a try.
Sure. Yeah, thank you all. That sounds like a good next step.
Sorry. Not the best solutions, but
I think that's a great solution. Yeah.
I'm thinking about his other problem.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah. Not what you
Well,
expect.
you win some, you lose some, I guess.
think
Yeah, there you go.
You have to send the engine in, and there's no reason to make a decision until you know what the state of everything is. Really.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Great
Well,
question.
Thank you all.
good luck, Kyle. Thanks for calling.
Thanks, Kyle. Bye-bye.
Okay, well, that's a wrap on our special podcast from the Wright Brothers National Museum at the Carolyn Historical Park in Dayton, Ohio. We would
said
really
it all.
like to, I said it all. It's a
That's
mouthful.
great.
We would really like to thank the VP of Museum Operations, Alex Heckman, for all his help in bringing us here, and Mackenzie Whitmer, the Executive Director of the National Aviation Heritage Area, for making this possible. And best thanks to Richard Stepler, our great mentor and guide, who is the chief pilot for the Wright B Flyer. He actually gets to fly it. We had a great time here, and we hope you enjoyed all our questions and answers, and we will see you next time.
See you guys. Come to Dayton.
And from the West Coast, bye-bye.